Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., leader of the Civil Rights Movement, once said, "Our lives begin to end the day that we become silent about things that matter." Today's youth is tomorrow's future, and in a world that is surrounded by negativity, it became my mission to educate students about one incredibly important trait that is commonly overlooked: positivity. Hello judges, my name is Reid, and this is my teaching train project, Focus on the Upside. To begin my project, I thought about the reasons why I should teach students about positivity. According to Jennifer Reid, author and researcher for the New York Times, adults aged 20 to 49 can have anywhere between 12,000 to 60,000 thoughts per day. Up to 90% of their thoughts can be the exact same as the day before, but even more significant is that up to 80% of their thoughts can be negative. Being consumed in negative thoughts can lead to mental illnesses such as anxiety and depression. Currently, the CDC states that for children aged 3 through 17 with behavior problems, about 1 in 3 have anxiety and about 1 in 5 have depression. After learning these heartbreaking statistics, I began to wonder how I could reduce the number of negative thoughts children have by teaching them about positivity. I was also curious as to see whether or not I could create a compelling lesson plan about this topic that would meet the individual needs of learners. After I had established my areas of focus, I could then set a goal for my project. For this project, I wanted to thoroughly research the education profession and successfully impact youth by teaching 20 students about how focusing on the upside can positively affect their lives. Moreover, I wanted to create a fun lesson plan that clearly establishes the objectives of my project. And following, I wanted to present this lesson to one class and gather information on how much the students both gained and retained from the project to see whether or not my project was beneficial in reducing their negative thoughts and behaviors. I will continue to explain the remainder of my planning process as I continue my presentation. I used the FCCLA Career Exploration document to help me analyze the various aspects of the teaching profession. By doing this, I learned the criteria Ohio teachers must have in order to become successful educators. And I also learned about the various skills needed to become a teacher, such as communication, creativity, and commitment. The job outlook for this profession is great, as employment is expected to increase at least 3% by 2028. After completing this research, I chose Miss Julie Zaper, a third grade teacher at Holland Elementary School, to be my mentor, as she is not only dedicated to both her profession and the students that she teaches, but she is also an amazing role model. After I had evaluated the teaching profession, I had to evaluate myself to see whether or not I would be truly fit for this project. I am personally interested in a career in education because I am passionate about changing children's lives. I am suitable for this project as I am a great listener and am always willing to help students solve their problems. I used several self-assessment websites such as Ohio Means Jobs and further concluded that I am best fit for a career in education based on my preferences. After I had completed the research and self-assessments needed for this project, I reached out to Ms. Zaper by email and asked her if I could shadow her for one day as well as present one lesson to her class about positivity. On November 25th, when I went to shadow Mrs. Zaper, I paid special attention to the classroom management techniques she used in order to maintain the attention of her students. She used several repeat after me chants, such as "macaroni and cheese, everybody freeze," and I took note of these techniques so that I can make my presentation as informative yet as efficient as possible. After I had finished shadowing Mrs. Zaper, I could then create my lesson plan. My lesson plan related to Family and Consumer Science Standard number 4.3.4 to demonstrate a variety of teaching methods to meet the individual needs of learners, as well as Standard 4.6.1 and Standard 4.5.3 as seen here. Although my project does not directly relate to the curriculum distributed by the Ohio Department of Education, Springfield Local Schools District is committed to creating a growth mindset initiative for all of its schools, including Holland Elementary. Thus, my project regarding positivity most certainly relates to this curriculum and standards. Not only did I want my lesson plan to benefit audio, visual, and kinesthetic learners, which are the 3 main types of learning styles, but while I was shadowing Mrs. Zaper, I concluded that many of her students use a form of sketchnoting in order to pay attention to Mrs. Zaper's lessons. Because of this, I wanted to add an activity that was focused on scribble learners as well. When I presented my lesson to the class, my attention-getting activity was called Partly Cloudy. For this activity, the students watched the Pixar short film Partly Cloudy, and I gave them no introduction as to why they were watching this film. After they were done watching it, I asked the students why I might have used this as my icebreaker activity and what the topic of today's lesson was. This was meant to benefit visual learners, as the students had to pay attention to the characters' behaviors because the film had no audio. The second activity I had presented to the students was called the Human Knot, and for this activity, the students were to split up into two groups and stand into two separate circles, and they were instructed to each hold two other people's hands that were not to the immediate left or right of them. This created the human knot, and once it was formed, the students could not let go of each other's hands until they had successfully gotten themselves untangled. This activity was meant to benefit kinesthetic learners, as the students had to use their bodies to actively get themselves out of a difficult situation. Not only did this activity teach the students about how to remain positive in difficult situations, but it also taught them about critical thinking and collaboration. The third activity I had planned for the students was called The Last Stop on Market Street, Kahoot. And for this activity, I read the students the book The Last Stop on Market Street aloud. I asked the students to pay attention to the plot and the message of the book, as after I had finished reading it to the students, they had to play a fun game of Kahoot related to the plot and the message of the story. This was meant to benefit audio learners, as the students had to pay attention to verbal information I was giving them. The last activity I had planned was called Pages of Positivity. For this conclusion activity, the students were instructed to create beautiful works of art that were based on the information they had learned throughout my lesson. This was meant to benefit scribble learners, as the students were given creative freedom to create these worksheets that were then later hung around the classroom as reminders to stay positive when times get tough. In addition to audio, visual, kinesthetic, and scribble learners, some students learn best through using technology. For this project, I used technology in a plethora of ways. I used Gmail to communicate with Mrs. Zaper. I used Google Slides to create a fun presentation for the students to follow along with throughout my lesson. I used Google Forms to send out pre- and post-assessments to the students, and I also had the students play a fun game of Kahoot while the answers and questions were displayed on the smartboard screen. In order to evaluate whether or not my project was truly beneficial in decreasing the number of negative thoughts the children had, I created How Am I Feeling Today cards for each student to complete for 1 week before my lesson and for 1 week after my lesson. I created a fun color-coded key for the students, and they had to choose a color that best represented their emotions for that day and color in each box. After the students had colored in each box, I was able to conclude that over 58% of the students reported higher happiness rates and lower negativity rates after my lesson than before my lesson. I also gave the students a Google Form assessment in order to see how much information they had retained from my lesson. After the students had completed these forms, I was able to conclude that over 45% of the students answered a higher number of questions correctly on their post-assessment than they did on their pre-assessment. Overall, I'm very proud of how the students did on their assessments. If I were to do this project over again, I would definitely work on my classroom management techniques. I only had one classroom management chant to maintain the attention of the students throughout my lesson. This proved to be not enough, as I was feeling very pressed for time near the end of my lesson. In conclusion, I am incredibly proud of the students that I have taught. Even though I was the one teaching the lesson, the students also taught me about how there's always hope for a future. In a world surrounded by negativity, I am looking forward to seeing how these students choose to leave silence in their past and bring positivity into their future. Thank you so much.